We are so glad you're here. Just so blessed to have you with us. We've tried fundraisers without anybody showing up, and we don't make as much money. And so we're really pleased to have you with us tonight. My name is Brian Dyer. I've been blessed to be the chairman of the board the last couple of years. I've been blessed in so many ways, and I get to, since I have the mic, I'm gonna share with you something. I bought these for Christmas last year. A tackle box and the coolest fishing pool you have ever seen in your life. It's a Star Wars theme. Look at this. But my daughter, Danielle, was so gracious to provide me a fishing buddy. And we haven't gone fishing yet. My wife insists that he has to be able to walk before we do that. But we've got the tools. We're ready to go. And you know, when she told me she was having a baby last October, we were so beyond excited. We were thrilled. And I mean, I did get the fishing pole. I gave it to them for safekeeping. But he's going to use it one day. But we've been so excited and blessed and thrilled. I mean, the excitement before the baby ever arrived was ecstatic. And you know what? It makes me so happy to be grandpa. And it also breaks my heart that there are girls every day who walk into our center who don't know that enthusiasm. They don't know that encouragement. They don't know, and there are babies who are not greeted with that kind of anticipation in my life. And that's why Lifeline exists. We exist to let these girls and their babies know that neither one of them is expendable to us. Both are valuable to us. We love them, and we want them all to thrive. Thank you for being a part of that. I'm going to open us up in a word of prayer. Father, by your grace and your mercy, you've brought us together this evening, and I pray, dear Lord, that your blessings would be upon this time. Bless all that is said and all that is done. I pray, dear God, you would be glorified. Bless the food to our bodies to your service. In Jesus' name, amen. Were you clapping for me or for Titan? All right. We're gonna have some table section leaders who are gonna come around and dismiss you by tables so that we can prevent any confusion. They'll let you know when you can go back and serve yourselves at the tables. All of the dishes are labeled, so some of them are gluten-free and some are vegan. Yeah. So you guys can take whatever that stuff is, and you can help yourselves, but all of the food will be back there, and they'll release you to go do that. I think we have two ladies who are assigned that task, and so God bless you. We'll continue as they dismiss you for your tables.
I would like to say, what a meal, and thank you to Connect Catering for providing such a wonderful meal, just outstanding. We're going to start the evening off with a special presentation. I'm going to turn the mic over to Board President Brian, and he will proceed with that.
If I could have Mike Loughnane stand up. Come on up here, Mike, so everybody can look at how pretty you are. Mike got off the board this year. He has... I don't know if I would say resigned, more like retired, but he was the founding part of Lifeline 35 years ago, and he has been on the board since then, and just a valuable asset. He brought a lot of talent. I wrote some things here, some notes. He brought a lot of talent to the board. He could fit 5 Tide Pods in his mouth at one time. So he's really skilled. With him off the board, our meetings are a little faster, and we don't have to explain everything quite in as detail as we used to. But we're still missing him a lot off the board. When he resigned, he called me up first and said, "Brian, I wanted to let you know before I announced it." And I said, "Mike, I'll accept that resignation, but only with the stipulation that we still get to call you when we have any questions." And he agreed to that. And we do miss him. Love him dearly. I met him a long time ago. He had brown hair and I had hair. So we go back quite a ways. but I know that he's now engaging much more actively, or as much as he can, in the men's ministry at his church. And I appreciate that also. And I want to wish him the best of luck in that, because I believe that if we have men who can live up to the standard of manhood that they're supposed to, it'll sure help out with the ministry of Lifeline as well. Kurt?
Would you please join me in standing for reading of the citation to accompany the award of the Guardian of the Unborn Hearts of Idaho? To Mr. Michael S. Loughnane, in recognition of his distinguished service as founding and continuing member and officer of Lifeline Pregnancy Care Center, commencing in 1985 until May of 2021. Mr. Mike Loughnane was instrumental in the organization of Lifeline from the very first organizational meeting held at the Cayley Center for Wellness in Caldwell. His professional expertise set the foundation on the ministry on solid footing, legal and financial. His focus on issues, clarity of discussion, and business acumen provided wisdom and continuity for a myriad of decisions and situations encountered throughout the ensuing years. Mr. Loughnane's continuing service as treasurer during both lean and abundant times established foundational principles guiding Lifeline. Monthly board meetings were productive and enjoyable because of his wisdom, spiritual insight, and sense of humor. He worked diligently to protect the unity of the board with respect and concern for all personnel, demonstrating great leadership year after year after year. His consistent walk with Jesus is raison d'etre. Lifeline has experienced such great favor and blessing from God since its inception. Mr. Loughnane has been a mentor to many and an example to all board members, staff, employees, and volunteers. Most importantly, he has remained steadfast and unyielding in his promotion of the sanctity of life, particularly the innocent, knit together by God, still in the womb. The children, many now adults, allowed to begin life because of Mr. Loughnane's involvement with Lifeline, is being lived today and written and continues on into our future. The numbers and stories of each are known fully only to God, yet will be revealed one day soon in heaven and eternity. For Mr. Mike Loughnane's 35-plus years of dedication, commitment, and distinctive service to Lifeline Pregnancy Care Center, and for the protection and preservation of the innocent lives within the wombs of the Treasure Valley, we gratefully present him this award, Guardian of the Unborn Hearts of Idaho.
We have a KTSY.
My situation was really difficult. My car was breaking down where I wouldn't have it for weeks at a time, couldn't even go to the store to get groceries. And then on top of that, I found out I was pregnant, and the baby daddy, or the father, said that he did not want to be in our lives. So I did consider an abortion, but when I heard the free ultrasounds here at Lifeline, I was like, what? I didn't know this existed. And then, yeah, just going through the experience, being able to see that there's actually something living, and I got to see a heartbeat. And at that point, I realized, wow, this is real. It's not just 2 lines on a pregnancy test anymore. I can actually see that it's a developing life that is now in my hands. I am 37 weeks and I'm getting super excited. I've got all the baby gear that I need from Lifeline, so it makes me feel more powerful as a single mom doing it on my own.
That was just a little snippet of Julia's story that you might have heard if you tuned in a few weeks ago to the Heartbeat of Hope fundraiser on 89.5 KTSY. Good evening. I'm Tristy from the morning show. So grateful to be here in a room full of people who are choosing hope and sharing it with girls and families who don't know that they have another choice. And to be on the air and to share these stories was miraculous. It was humbling. It was something that we had never done before. So thank you, Lifeline, for trusting us with your stories and for trusting us. And because of the generosity of the KTSY family, and if you listen, you're included in that. We were able to raise over $17,000 in just a day and a half for Lifeline Pregnancy Care Center. So this is just a check presentation. This actually doesn't cash. But who should I give it to? Who's in charge? She'll handle the money. Sure. All right, you like that. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of the good work that you guys are doing in our community. And we hope that this helps fund a few more ultrasounds, so there's a few more stories just like Julia's. We brought a couple of things for her or someone like her who could, just use a few baby items. And thank you for letting us be a part of making this a successful ministry in the Treasure Valley. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to KTSY and your wonderful ministry and for partnering with us. God bless you.
Thank you.
Lifeline has been such a big part of my life that helped me out so much. Because with this pregnancy, the father wanted me to get an abortion, and that was very hard for me. I was kind of torn on what to do because I wanted to have a father for my baby if I had this baby. And coming here, I brought him, and he's seen the ultrasound, and he changed everything. He wanted to be a good father. He started working harder to provide for her, but just seeing that ultrasound, the heartbeat, it just changed the way he felt. And I don't know where else I would have went to show him that, to help him get the knowledge he needed to see what we could have done for this baby instead of just taking its life. They help us so much. They do baby showers for the Embrace Grace, and classes to help you learn more, even get closer to God. Something that I think I needed to realize I needed more of that in my life. And having this baby and seeing her beautiful face, it's been such a blessing. Lifeline's helped me with clothes for my baby to, even one time I couldn't feel my baby move, and I was scared, and I asked them if they had something I could use to hear her heartbeat, and they're like, just come in for another ultrasound. And it made me feel so much peace once I seen that. She's a huge blessing for me, and this place, they've given me so much support. I don't know where I would have got that from. I have family, but a lot of people don't know how to help you like Lifeline has.
Good evening. So if I haven't met you before, my name's Robin Waters, and I'm the Executive Director at Lifeline. And I thank you so much for coming out tonight. And as you can see in the videos, we've got one more to show you from a client. I just want you to know that none of those were scripted. We just asked them a couple questions and then let them talk. And so it's always just really rewarding time of the year, even though sometimes it's a little stressful for me because I'm like, oh, what are they going to say? But as I sit and listen, I'm just amazed, you know, at that we're able to do this ministry today in today's world. So thank you for being here because you guys make it possible. Of course, these are really exciting times in the pro-life movement, with Idaho passing the heartbeat bill this year and Texas and all that's going on over there with the heartbeat law. There's really good things happening in the political arena, and we are grateful for that. In fact, tonight we are honored to have a few state and local government representatives here. I'm not going to have them stand, but we are thankful that they are here and that they care about this ministry. We obviously know when we make some headway that Planned Parenthood is going to, you know, come back with a big and mighty swing, so the work is not done. I would encourage everyone here that's on social media, which about half of you maybe, follow some LifeSite news, follow Abby Johnson, Lila Rose, some of those websites, so you can keep up to date on what's happening in the government. But tonight, we're not going to talk about all of that stuff. We're going to talk about pregnancy resource centers. And the way I describe it is, I think of pregnancy resource centers as the arm of grace in the pro-life movement. There's the political, which is so very important, but then there's also just the day-to-day of ministering one-on-one with the clients. And so that's what we're going to focus on. In particular, of course, Lifeline Pregnancy Care Center. So I recognize quite a few of you, but I think we have some new people. How many are here for the very first time? Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. So, as you saw with Mike, so we've been here 35 years in this community, and what is it we do? I'm just going to run through that really quickly because I have people ask me all the time, what do you guys really do? So, we offer free pregnancy tests, limited ultrasounds, education on options, including pregnancy, adoption, and abortion. Sometimes people are surprised that we do education on abortion, but we, of course, don't promote abortion, but we want the girls, a lot of the girls that come in actually don't know what an abortion procedure involves, and so we talk to them about that. We have a clothing resource room, newborn gift bags. I think there's a slide with some of the stats. I'm not going to bore you with all of that. We do referrals for medical care, limited STI testing, and then we have a couple programs. So let me talk to you about the programs. We have, first and foremost, No Regrets. This is a program that has been in our public schools for at least 15 years. No, I think we're going close to 20. 20? Yeah, there's Kim. So we have two wonderful presenters. They are on fire. I mean, can you imagine going into a junior high room and talking about sex? I mean, pray for these girls. I mean, they love what they do, and just last week they were in my office sharing with me some of the new curriculum that they have, and it is amazing. It is, it's right on for these kids. So we want to keep them in prayer. They reach, not last year because of COVID, but typically they reach over 4,000 students in that program. So there's a lot of teachers that ask them to come back, and the students all love it. So we call that our preventative part of Lifeline, right? Because if they don't get pregnant in the first place, then they don't come see us. So we like that. Another program we have is Embrace Grace. We started that about 6 years ago. I love this program. So what it is we have a 12-week program that the area churches put on. We have about 6 churches that once a year gather some ladies in their church, and then they put on this. It's actually like a support group. There's already curriculum, there's already videos, so they just come around these moms and they encourage them, they mentor them, and at the end of those 12 weeks, they actually get to have a baby shower. We had a leaders meeting last month with the Embrace Grace leaders, and one of the leaders said to me, I just wanted to, when I originally started doing this, I just wanted to hang around the cool ladies at my church, and do this. I thought it would be fun. She says, but now, 6 years later, I do it because of the moms. She said, I love these girls. And so that was a real testimony. The other one, leader said that this is their best outreach in their church. She said these girls come in, some of them accept the Lord, as their Savior. They bring their families back. And so that is a really exciting piece of it. So sometimes at Lifeline, we can't mentor as long as we want. We see them for half an hour, 45 minutes, a few times through their pregnancy. But this really enables a lot more interaction with the moms. And so it's a great program. So 5 years, we've graduated at least 60 moms through that program. So we're excited about that. And the question I always get asked, what's going on with the house next door? Do you have that slide? Yeah. So I don't know if half the room is new, but if you have been with us for a while, you know that we purchased this house next door to our building on 12th Avenue 2.5 years ago. Because of our generous donors and support, we were able to pay cash for the home. It's 75 years old. The intent is for it to be a maternity home that will house 3 to 5 women, 3 to 5 moms. They will be able to stay there through their pregnancy and then 6 months after. During that time, they will learn how to nurture and bond with their babies, just a lot of life skills with these moms that we'll be able to do. And again, the numbers will be less, but the impact will be a lot deeper. So we're really excited about that. So where are we on this? That's what everybody wants to know. God's timing is what everyone says back to me, because I'm probably the one doing this the most. But we're very excited. The plans have been submitted to the city, and so we're actually waiting on them. Are there city leaders in here? No, okay. Not mentioning any names. Okay, so we're waiting on that. That should actually be any time. We signed a contract last week with a contractor, and all of our subcontractors are ready to go. We have a lot of Christian subcontractors that will be working on the project. And so hopefully this time next year, we'll be up here talking about the opening of the home. So we're very excited about that. Okay. 2 more things I want to talk to you about real quickly. First, the video. We have another video story that we're going to play. Like I said a few minutes ago, we don't tell them what to say. This gal actually sent us the video. She taped it herself. It was 15 minutes in length. So we shortened it up to 7. I couldn't get it under 7. I tried. But listen to her and just realize that this is what we hear a lot in our client rooms. And as you listen, you will hear them both. Well, the gal that was in the earlier video, they talk about the fathers. And that's a ministry that I always love to talk about. Because I feel like in the pro-life movement, it's not talked about a lot. It's not talked about enough. We always just immediately jump to women's issue. And wherever there is a baby, there is a father. And if I could have taken a picture last week when I walked out of my office into the lobby and we were doing ultrasounds that day, there was a dad there, and he was sitting and he had his head down, and he's like this, and I was just like, oh, if people could see the dads that come into Lifeline, and just sometimes they're more anxious than the moms, because as a mom, you kind of know what's going on with your body, you kind of know what to expect, but these dads don't, and a lot of them run, right? A lot of them like, I'm out of here. So we need to educate. We need to come alongside these dads. I'm very excited to say that next year in March, there will be the first ever men's pro-life ministry. If anyone's interested in going, please let us know, but we'll put it out in our newsletter. Roland Warren, who was a speaker for us about 5 years ago, and he used to be the National Fatherhood president. He is now the president of CareNet. He is going to be in charge of that conference, and so we're really excited about that one. And then the last one I want to talk about is post-abortion. With Melissa talking tonight about her story, abortion can bring up a lot of things in a lot of people, right? I hope that most of you know by now, because we try to say it every time we get up and talk, over 50% of women that have abortions have some type of relation with a church, whether they attend once a month or once a year, but they consider themselves somewhat Christian. So if that's over 50%, then that means if we can work on how we talk about abortion in the church, we could win half of this battle already, just within ourselves. And so the post-abortive woman is in the church. She is here tonight. I know several tonight, but I know don't know several, but I know you're out there. A lot of people say, look at your donor base. That's where the post-abortive woman is. So I just want to be sensitive to that, and I know Melissa will be in her talk. But about it's been 6 years, 6 years ago, I was in charge of doing some post-abortive teaching, and I was learning it myself. I kind of always said, well, why do we have to be so careful talking to them? And why do we have to be so, Well, after I took a couple classes with post-abortive women, I understood. It is deep, deep, deep stuff. And in that, I remember this verse, and I want to just tell you tonight, Revelation 12:11. It says, and they triumphed over him, and they're talking about the enemy. They triumphed over the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And when I heard that in that context, with those women that had those stories that were so personal and so deep, I just got so excited because I was like, oh, if they could tell their story, if people could really hear the pain that I saw and heard that abortion really causes, we would make so much more headway than just shouting and protecting ourselves, and our way of thinking. I think the post-abortive women have a lot to say, and we just need to come around them with love and grace. And so tonight, if you flip your program over, there is a little thing there. I want to call it homework, but it's not really homework. For you to think about your testimony. Because look, we can triumph over the enemy by what? The blood of the Lamb, which we already have, and 2, by the word of our testimony. So each one of us has a testimony. And so what is your testimony? And where are you going to say it? You don't have to say it in front of hundreds of people. You can say it. We were talking about this in an in-service, and one of the gals said, I just talked to one of my kids about my testimony, and they're like, wow, Mom, I never heard that. So I don't know who it is God wants you to tell your testimony to, but that is the way to triumph over the enemy. And so tonight, enjoy these stories, but as you enjoy them, think about your own story and where God is working and moving, and be willing to share that.
Hello
Hello, my name is Araceli. I just want to share my story of how I decided to have my baby girl and how I got to the Lifeline organization and how they helped me. I got pregnant and it was unexpected, and we were happy the day we found out, but then things got really bad because I don't know why. I just wanted him to go away and I didn't want to know anything about him. We got into big fights, and so yeah, in those moments where I feel hopeless and helpless, and I remember being so hard with 3 kids, I thought, and one of them has autism and everything, it's so hard. I cannot deal with a baby. Like, the baby doesn't deserve this life, and I just can't do it on my own. Like, I just like, it was too much for me. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need to not have this baby. And so I went to the place where they do abortions, and I would have never thought of this, but I had a faith crisis, and all this movement, like my body, my choice, I was like, I don't think it's wrong to do an abortion. And I thought it was just cells in my body getting together, and it was still okay for, I don't know. I just felt that it was okay. And so I went to the abortion center, and they thought, you know what, if it's not expected, if it's unplanned, it's not okay. You need to plan, and you need to have life wonderful for your baby, pretty much, which that never happens. Life is never perfect. And so when I went to that place, they gave me a pamphlet, and Lifeline was there with free ultrasounds. And I thought, oh, I want to make sure how many weeks. I want to know. I don't know why I wanted to know that, but I wanted to know how many weeks the baby was, because I didn't want it to be a real baby. For me, it wasn't a real baby. And so I called them, I made an appointment, I showed up, and then I realized it was a place where they talk you out of it. And I was like, oh no, what am I doing here? I really want to do an abortion. And so this beautiful, lovely lady took me back to a living room space, and she talked about the Bible. And at this point, I was not sure about the Bible. I was like, this is just people writing stories, and they claim to talk in the name of God, but I don't believe it. And so this lady marked some chapters or some verses, and she was really sweet. She was really nice. And I talked to her about my faith crisis, and she understood, and she made me realize that God and Jesus Christ were still true. Like, they are real. And she just reassured me that God is real, and that Christ is his son, and that there's a purpose. And she just softened my heart and made me remember that those things are true, and that I do believe in those things. So they were very kind, very sweet, very nice, very understanding, compassionate. I did not feel judged, like, oh, what a horrible human being, she wants to kill a baby. Like, they were trying to understand and empathize, and just, they were very loving and compassionate, really nice people. And then when I hear the heartbeat, it was shocking to me. Like, I honestly thought it was just cells together. It wasn't a baby yet, but it was, and I could see everything. It was a baby with a heartbeat. It was real. And so my thoughts were, it's a human life. And I'm grateful that they reminded me of the things that I believed my whole life, just because I was in a faith crisis. And they helped me. I don't know, it's really hard, because when you are having this crisis of faith, you are disoriented. You don't know where to go. You don't know what's real, what's not. And they just helped me remember that God is real. And I'm just grateful for that, because I always knew God was real. It was just temporarily that I wasn't sure, but I know He is. So this is my baby. Her name is Sofia Leilani. It means flower from heaven. Leilani, it's flower from heaven. Sofia means wisdom. And I love her. She's 2 months old. And after having 3 boys, I finally got a baby girl. Dad and mom are together. We are going to therapy. No, don't cry. But we're getting along well. He's trying his best. I know he's trying. It's not just me. He really wants things to work out, because we love our kids and we know we're good people. We just need to figure out things to communicate, and be nice to each other. So life is wonderful again, because we are all together. We are trying to build our home the way it's supposed to be. And I do love him, and I know he loves me, and we love this baby so much.
Wonderful stories. Wonderful stories how God is at work in Lifeline because of supporters like you. I wanted to point out, on one side of that card, you get to write your story. On the other side are all those who gave unselfishly to either be event sponsors or table sponsors. They totally underwrote the cost of this banquet. That's why it was free for you. Say a big thank you to them. Well, we've reached that moment. Time to hear from Melissa. If you haven't already, you're going to want to be able to see the screen. So turn in your chairs, whatever you need to do, so you can see. Have you ever been thrown a curveball? You know, that moment when you thought something was going to go a certain way? It happened, but not the way you expected it to. In the last 24 hours, Robin and I got a curveball. We got a phone call from Melissa. Her young daughter fell off the monkey bars at school and broke 2 bones in her arm. Well, guess what? She needed to be with her daughter. So tonight, with the help of our wonderful, technologically sound and special people over there, particularly Troy Waters, we still get to have Melissa with us. So let me tell you a little about her. Melissa is a survivor of a failed saline infusion abortion. Despite the initial concerns regarding Melissa's future after surviving the attempt to end her life at approximately 7 months of gestation, she has not only survived, but thrived. Melissa is a master's level social worker and the author of the book, You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. Her second book, You Are More, A Survivor's Guide to Healing, came out in June in 2020. Both of those books are available on Amazon.com or any local bookstore. She is the founder and director of the Abortion Survivors Network. This is the only healing and advocacy organization for abortion survivors. And Melissa and her team have connected with 356 survivors since 2020, or up till 2020. She told us today they are actively still looking for survivors and hope to grow that number. Melissa is a frequent contributor to pro-life and conservative news outlets and a regular guest on radio and television programs around the world, fulfilling the purpose that she believes God set out for her when he saved her from the certain death of the abortion attempt. Melissa is truly a voice for the voiceless. Please help me welcome Melissa Ohden.
Your testimony is powerful. And so I hope that you remember that after tonight. And I hope as I share my testimony with you, you can hear in my story that yes, it's a story of how abortion impacts people's lives for generations. But more importantly, it's a story about God's goodness, about his plans of restoration, of redemption, of reconciliation in all of our lives, in our families, and ultimately in our world. My story started 44 years ago. I'll age myself very quickly. We'll get that one little detail out of the way. I'm 44. It's okay. I don't mind having to tell the world that I'm 44 years ago because it was 44 years ago that my birth mother, as a 19-year-old college student, found herself looking an awful lot like the women who come through the doors of Lifeline still today. Being 19 years old, being a college student, not being married to my biological father yet. Those are all common statistics and backgrounds that we see in women still today who come through the doors of pregnancy centers across our nation and around our world. And sadly, one of the greatest statistics my birth mother fits is one that isn't often talked about in our society, and that's coercion. You know, we live in this society and we've seen that verbiage heating up even more here recently with people talking about abortion as a choice, as a right, as healthcare. But we know that for so many women, there is no choice. And certainly when you peel back the word choice, it always involves taking the life of another human being. But when we look at women's experiences when it comes to abortion, over 64% of women identify feeling pressured into their abortion. And I always have to beg the question in our world that talks about abortion as a choice, then where is the choice for those 64% of women who report feeling pressured? As you'll hear tonight in my story, as I've learned more about my birth mother Ruth's experience and what happened to me, I now know that not only was it not her choice to have that saline infusion abortion that was meant to end my life, and it wasn't just something she was coerced into, it was literally forced upon her against her will. She had no other choice. She was forced to have that abortion, and by someone who should have protected her, supported her options. And I'm sure Robin and her team could tell you story after story of women who come through their centers still today who experienced that like Ruth. Because in her circumstances, it was her mother, my maternal grandmother, who forced that abortion upon her. You know, I know in my heart, my grandmother knew an awful lot about the scientific and the biblical basis for when life begins. My maternal grandmother was a prominent nurse in their community of Sioux City, Iowa. So she knew a lot about the scientific basis for when life begins. And as someone who was sitting in church every Sunday, she also knew about the biblical basis for when life begins. But sadly, she also knew how to make a secret forced abortion take place on her own daughter, bypassing hospital regulations and procedures at the time, believing that no one would ever find out that the abortion was not Ruth's choice. I know very well intentioned friends, family members. Just last week, I ran into some members of the clergy who admitted to coercing and forcing abortions on people within their own church. We also know sometimes it can be medical professionals who are responsible for that kind of coercion and force. And so I know that my grandmother is not alone in that decision that she made. I think what makes Ruth's circumstances and mine so much different is that I've lived to tell our story. I know abortion is not a pleasant thing to ever talk about. It's not a pleasant thing to hear about, especially on a night like this, when we're celebrating lives being saved and transformed through this ministry. But I want to share a little bit about that procedure with you so you can understand just what God has done in my life. That saline infusion abortion that was forced upon my birth mother involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. The intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison and scald me to death. Usually that procedure lasted about 72 hours. If the child was fortunate enough, their life was ended within about the first 24. And then the remainder of that time was spent attempting to induce labor with the intent of that deceased child then being expelled from the womb. I've met many women who underwent that same procedure and have told me how they felt their child thrashing about in the womb before they ultimately felt things quiet. And they knew then that the procedure had been completed. It's a horrific procedure for any woman. Every abortion procedure is horrific for a woman and a child. And that's why we're here tonight. Not only because every child deserves better than abortion, but also because every woman deserves better than what Ruth and other women have gone through in an abortion experience. We actually know through my medical records just how horrific that abortion procedure was. I didn't soak in that toxic salt solution for just 24 hours or 3 days. I actually soaked in it for 5, way longer than the standards of that abortion procedure. Why? I'm stubborn. I mean, that's the gist of it. I was not budging over that 5-day period. They just kept trying time and time again to induce Ruth's labor with me. And they weren't successful until that 5th day. Of course, they believed that the abortion had been successful. And so when I was finally delivered in the final step of that abortion procedure on that 5th day, they believed that I would be delivered as a quote unquote successful abortion, otherwise known as a deceased child. But quite clearly, God had other plans for me that day. I am forever grateful. And I wish I could tell you all that when I was delivered alive that day, all of the medical professionals saw my inherent dignity and value the way that you do. But this is not usually how stories like mine are played out. My parents were told years ago that when I was accidentally born alive that day, the abortionist demanded that I be left in that hospital room to die. We now know that the story behind that day is even more sad than the abortionist. We now know it was someone much closer to me who made that decision and gave that demand. And maybe you can already guess who it was. It was my maternal grandmother. Not only did she force that abortion, but she heavily monitored it there in the hospital. And coming face to face with me that day as her firstborn grandchild, she is the one who demanded to the medical professionals that I be left to die. And I don't fault her for that. I don't share that with you for you to cast judgment upon her. I know that's a really easy place to go to. I share that with you so you can understand, like I do, that this is what abortion has done for our society. That people now make life and death decisions about lives like mine every single day, regardless of their relationship. And I share it with you too, because I think this is an important reminder for all of us about love. There's nothing I have ever learned about my biological mother or her family that have ever changed the fact that I love them unconditionally, radically, as broken people. Anything that I've learned about them has actually led me to have my heart broken for them time and time again, because I can't imagine what it was that my grandmother went through in her life that ultimately led her to make those kind of decisions about mine. So this is where love comes into the equation. And I hope that you take that same opportunity to love people in your life, because it not only changes the world, but it changes us as we love people that way. And I'm so grateful that other people loved me that day, no matter what demands my grandmother was making about my life. I now know that there were nurses on staff at St. Luke's Hospital who defied her very order. My mom and dad had heard about two nurses in particular over the years who intervened to save my life that day. And I now know for sure about one of those nurses in particular. How? Because this isn't just my story. This is the story of ordinary people just like you, who, by the grace of God, have done extraordinary things for me by praying for me, by rushing me off to the NICU, by loving me, by never forgetting me. That list could go on and on. And when you're thinking about how you're called to make a difference in the world, and you're thinking about the work that Lifeline does, I hope that you remember that even on those days where you feel like you are so ordinary, you are extraordinary by the grace of God. When you speak the words that you are called to speak and you do it in love, when you take action, you are making a difference in other people's lives. You may never understand or see the fruits of that here on earth, but trust me, I am just a living example of the difference that people can make in someone's life. So I know how other people's lives intersect with mine, because I've been connected with some of the medical professionals who cared for me that day, and even when I was sent to another hospital. I now know that a tall blonde nurse rushed me off to the NICU that day, believing that if other people found out that the abortion had failed and this little girl had lived, that maybe, just maybe, they could provide medical care that would save my life. And you would never know it if you passed me on the street. If I didn't share my story openly with the world, you would never suspect that I survived a failed abortion. You would never know that when I was rushed off to the NICU that day, the prognosis for my life was very poor. I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I was a whopping 2 pounds, 14 ounces. I could fit in the palm of your hand. And my birth weight is really interesting because it helps the medical professionals understand that my birth mother was much further along in her pregnancy than the 18 to 20 weeks that the abortionist had written on my medical records. And in fact, when I was rushed off to the NICU, we can see in my medical records in a little corner that the neonatologist remarked I was probably more like 31 weeks gestation. 31 weeks. I know it's a little bit mind-blowing. You know, I truly believe the Lord hid the truth about my life, knowing that the longer I stayed in the womb, the greater the likelihood would be that I could ultimately survive. But I love how he works in this ministry, because Lifeline is all about truth. Nothing is hidden. And I've heard that even listening in tonight, hearing some of the clients share their stories. They were provided information. They got to see their baby on an ultrasound. Those truths impacted their lives and enabled them to ultimately choose life for their child. So what an incredible blessing that this ministry is founded in truth. My life was hidden, the truth about me hidden for a very long time. But I know that that was a blessing for me. When I was whisked off to the NICU that day, I was fighting for my life. As I shared, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I suffered from severe respiratory and liver problems. I suffered from seizures for an extended period of time. The doctors even thought I had a fatal heart defect initially because of the amount of distress I was presenting with. And so they were very guarded about my future, believing that I would suffer from multiple disabilities if I survived past my infancy. And I am so thankful that no matter what the doctor's prognosis for my life was at the time, my adoptive parents didn't hesitate for a second to open their hearts and their home to me. You can catch my parents sometimes in interviews talk about how the first time they met me, I was still lying in an incubator full of tubes and wires, fighting for my life. And they fell radically in love with me. I often describe what my parents did as loving me into life. They saw God's inherent beauty alive within me, and they knew that they were called to be my parents. And I was loved so radically that I was healthy enough to go home to them about less than 3 months after surviving that failed abortion. Miraculous indeed. Love really does transform people's lives. We've seen it even in the client videos tonight. And I was loved mightily throughout my life, still am today. I grew up in what I thought was a very normal home. Adoption was the normal fabric of our family. I have an older sister who is 4 years older than I am. She was adopted from another family. Then our parents adopted me, no matter what they were told my life might look like. And then lo and behold, after 15 years of infertility, along came my little brother. And he's not adopted. It was the most radical thing to happen in my life at the age of 7, that my little brother came along, and not through adoption. We were raised in a home that adoption was just so normal. We grew up knowing that we were loved, and not just by our adoptive parents and not just by God, but my parents raised my sister and I to know that our biological parents loved us enough to give us life and the gift of a family when they couldn't care for us. I had no questions or doubts about that growing up until I met my own curveball at the age of 14. At that age, I discovered suddenly my whole story about surviving this failed abortion. And only because a very unplanned and unexpected kind of thing happened. My older sister, as a high school student, faced her own unplanned pregnancy. I wish she would have had a place like Lifeline to go to at the time, but we didn't have anywhere to go. And she was considering every option, which included abortion. When our parents found out that she was considering every option, they knew that they were called to speak boldly in defense of their grandchild and also save the life of their daughter. They told her my story after keeping it a secret from all of us as children. Many parents that I work with through the Abortion Survivors Network face that same struggle of if, how, when to tell a survivor their story. My parents didn't intend for my story to come out the way that it did, but they shared my story with my sister, hoping that it would make a difference. That was about 30 years ago now that my sister was told my story. I'm happy to tell you my oldest nephew is about 30 years old. She chose life for him, parented him, graduated from high school on time, went on and had other children, allowed my family this great opportunity to come alongside her and really put our pro-life beliefs into action. But that's ultimately how I found out my story, because during an argument with her one night, she let it slip that she felt more wanted by her biological parents than me. So picture, if you will, a cold October night at the age of 14. It is nearly 30 years ago for me that I sat our mother down on the couch and asked her to explain to me why it was that my sister could ever feel that way. That night, my mom had to speak words that no parent should ever have to say. Missy, your biological mother, had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it. It's been 30 years, and it feels like it was just yesterday. People often ask me, what is it like to find out that kind of news? And I think that the easiest way I can describe it is it feels like a bomb has gone off. I felt every emotion as humanly possible to feel. I felt anger for the first time towards my biological parents because at the age of 14, I couldn't understand how anybody could make that kind of decision about my life. I felt ashamed and embarrassed for surviving an abortion when we live in a world that talks about it as a choice and a right. I felt guilty for surviving when I knew tens of millions of children were not as fortunate as I was. I wrestled with that guilt for so many years. I suffered from all sorts of my own sufferings as a result of all of the emotions that I felt. I didn't want my parents to know that I really loathed being who I was. At the age of 14, I didn't want to be an abortion survivor. I didn't know that there were other people like me. I didn't know that for many, many years. And so I tried to distance myself from my pain, suffered in many ways, coped in many poor ways. Maybe some of you can relate to that. Alcohol abuse and eating disorder, every poor choice you can probably imagine, all the while keeping it a secret. But God knew. He gave me this story. And I am so grateful that he stood by me every step of the way, even when I wanted to distance myself from him because of the choices that I was making in my pain. And he allowed me to take a first step in healing very early on in my teenage years. And that big first step was forgiving my biological parents. And sometimes, even all these years later, it's hard for me to put that into words because I know we all struggle with forgiveness in our world. Grudges are easy to come by and hold on to. And even with deep faith, we can struggle with forgiveness. And for me, forgiveness is not a one-stop destination. It is a place that I arrive at on a daily basis. And things have happened in my life. The birth of my two daughters, for instance, where I had to forgive in the face of knowing that my children never would have lived if that abortion had been successful. And for me, my faith is what allows me to forgive. When I picture Christ on that cross and know that he didn't die for just me, but he died for you and my abortionist and my grandmother and my biological parents. And I see their humanity. I understand their brokenness. Those are those things that allow me to forgive time and time again. And so if you're struggling with forgiving someone, I encourage you to just meditate on that, to pray over it, to see the humanity of that person that you are struggling to forgive, because that ultimately set me out on this journey to fulfill the calling that God set out for me. I knew when I found out my story that God had placed this purpose within me. I was never thinking it would look like giving up a safe, comfortable life, giving up my career as a social worker, all of those things. But what I did know is that God had placed that passion in my heart to fulfill my calling. And so I knew after I went through that first step of forgiveness that God was calling me to do something with it. And so I started looking for my biological parents and I started trying to obtain my medical records. It took me over 10 years to find my birth parents. It took me over 10 years to obtain my medical records. And maybe some of you have lived out similar years in your life where you're desperately seeking God's will. You're matching it up with the plans that you have laid out in your life. I know sometimes those two things don't always fit together really well. Maybe you're also really trying to figure out what's God's perfect timing. We talk about that so much in our world, trusting God's perfect timing. But I think sometimes it's also really hard to trust in his perfect timing, because I can tell you I didn't plan on searching for 10 years for answers to my life. During those 10 years of searching, I learned so much about who God made me to be. I learned so much about how abortion affects people's lives. And I learned to fully trust in his will. And I'm grateful for that, because those are the lessons that I needed to come forward with his story in this world. And lo and behold, during my 10 years of searching, I tried time and time again to obtain those medical records, to only be told time after time that nothing existed. But suddenly in 2007, God's will finally started to unfold. I obtained my medical records. I am one of the few abortion survivors who has medical record of what they survived. As you heard in my introduction, I now run the Abortion Survivors Network. We also have an education and policy center that allows us to make a difference both at the state level and at the federal level on various bills. And we have now connected with 403 abortion survivors, even higher than what was in my introduction, one of whom is actually from Idaho. I hope that you have the opportunity to meet that survivor at some point very soon. But we go through a process as survivors and within our network of healing, of being equipped and empowered to use our voices, to even obtain our medical records. I now know that many of the survivors, I can't even say many, I would say most, will never have any record of what they survived. This is not something that is documented, as you can imagine, by medical professionals. And sometimes we do find it in adoption records, but I am one of those few. In my medical records that I obtained in 2007, it says some really interesting things. Things like a saline infusion for an abortion was done, but was unsuccessful. In another portion of my medical records, it even lists out a complication of my birth mother's pregnancy as that saline infusion abortion. I think those are some pretty wise words. You can say that abortion complicated her pregnancy, and you could say that abortion very much complicated her life and mine. And as hard as it was to read through some of those medical records at the time, I ultimately experienced a lot of joy, because in those medical records, they committed a really big mistake. In one little tiny corner, they forgot to black out my birth parents' names. We would call that a HIPAA violation in today's world, one of the bigger HIPAA violations that I've ever heard about. But I don't call that a HIPAA violation. I call that divine intervention, and I hope that you do too. After 10 years of searching for those medical records and my birth parents, and trust me, I had learned a lot over those years. In one fell swoop, God showed me that his will always be done, and his perfect timing really can unfold when it is his will. And maybe some of you would have taken the same next steps that I did at the time. That night, when I received those medical records and I learned who my birth parents were, I started searching very diligently on the internet for them. And you're never going to guess what I discovered. I was living in the very same city as my biological father. I didn't grow up in Sioux City, Iowa, where my birth mother's abortion took place. I grew up a couple of hours outside of that community, but I moved there during my years of searching to finish my master's degree. That's what I was thinking in my head. This is to finish my degree. I wasn't ever thinking, this is all part of God's greater plan of restoration and reconciliation. Who would have thought that my birth family was even from that community? And who would have thought 30 years later that I would still have biological family there? God knew. And so I prayed about it for many months before I ultimately did what I knew God called me to do. And that was reach out to my birth father. I sent him a letter to the office and not his home. That was my one way of trying to protect him a little bit, not knowing if he had ever told his family about me. And in that letter, I essentially told him all the things that I've told you all tonight. I'm alive and well. I know the truth. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. and let him know that if he ever wanted to communicate or establish some sort of relationship, I'd be waiting to hear from him. It's been over 14 years now, and I never got any response. And that's okay. Think about how many years God gave me to prepare for that possibility, and think about how I learned to fully surrender myself to what his will would look like in my life, regardless of what my plans were. So I surrendered that. And about the same time in 2007, I did set my sights on my birth mother, Ruth, and her family. I couldn't find my birth mother through my searching, but I found her family very easily. That maternal grandmother that I told you all about? I sent them a letter back in 2007 asking for them to reach out to Ruth on my behalf. Back then I didn't know that they played this huge role in the abortion taking place. And part of me looks back on that and thinks, wow, Melissa, I can't believe you did that. But a much greater piece of me looks back on it and says, you know what? Thank you, Lord, for being the one to guide me to do that, because they probably needed to hear from me just as much as Ruth did. I was never expecting any kind of response to my letter, but within days, my grandfather replied. In his letter, he admitted that he knew my live birth was not the intention that day at the hospital. He knew that I knew that. I think that was very courageous of him. But it was equally courageous for him to share some things about my birth mother, Ruth, and their family. And I want to share two of those points with you because they once again remind us why the work of Lifeline is so important. One of the points he shared was that Ruth had never told anyone about her abortion. And we know she's not alone in that. I'm so grateful that Robin shared tonight about the importance of healing after an abortion. Yes, we know we have exciting things happening politically in our world. And we know that we need to have legislation to save lives until we restore a culture of life. But I also very much believe we are a culture that needs to heal. If we have lost tens of millions of lives, in upwards of 70 million lives to abortion, then think about how many hundreds of millions of lives have been forever impacted by abortion. We must heal. And so if you have never shared your story with anyone when it comes to abortion, I hope you know that Lifeline is a safe place that you can turn to share your story. We don't want anyone to suffer in silence and shame with their story. There is always healing and forgiveness to be found. But my grandfather closed his letter with a final point that was very curious. It makes sense to me now, and maybe it will make sense to you too. He closed his letter by letting me know my messages would not be passed along to my birth mother, Ruth. Why? Because they were completely estranged. It makes sense, doesn't it? When we now know that that abortion was forced upon Ruth and their family was involved in that, it makes incredible sense that their relationships were ever changed after that day. And I can tell you, I see it in families around the world. Abortion doesn't just end a life most of the time. It impacts relationships. It changes families for generations unless healing occurs. And that's the last time I heard from my grandparents was well over 14 years ago. That's also when I came forward with my story for the first time. The very first time I shared my story was on Capitol Hill, because it's a friendly place for somebody like me with a story like this, isn't it? The very first time I shared my story, it was a fairly friendly crowd, but I went home and I told my husband, yeah, I'm never going to do that again. I'm not cut out to be a public speaker. I'm a social worker. A bundle of nerves. I was so sick to my stomach. But Troy, if you want to cue up that photo for me, I want to share a photo with you all. The very first time I shared my story, it wasn't a bad case of nerves that was plaguing me. It was a horrible case of morning sickness with that child that you see on the screen. That's our oldest daughter, Olivia, who is now 13 years old. I'll share with you in just a moment who the man is that she's pictured with. But the very first time I shared my story publicly there on the hill, I was just a couple of days pregnant with her. And I know that was a sure sign from God that I was doing what I was called to do with my life. And it was during my pregnancy with Olivia that I started to loosen my grip on my safe, comfortable life and my career and started to travel the world in defense of life. What I didn't know, though, is at the same time, my birth father was actually at home in Iowa fighting for his. That's why my birth father never replied to my letter, because he passed away about 6 months after I sent it to him. And I only learned that by Googling his name on the internet one night and finding his obituary. Maybe you've lived out those years in your life too, where you question God's plans once again. I can honestly tell you, I questioned how that could be God's plan. My adoptive parents are my mom and dad, period, end of sentence. But I grieved the loss of my birth father in a very big way. To search for him for so long, find him, and then lose him. I questioned God how that could ever be his plan. And I can tell you that God spoke so plainly back to me in my grief. He said, "Be patient, Melissa, because my plan is much greater than the one you had in mind." And it's always true, isn't it? It may not look anything like we expect it to or want it to, but God's plan is always greater. And as 2008 unfolded, I got to see God's great plan. God's plan involved our Olivia being born at St. Luke's Hospital. Does it sound familiar to anybody? The very same hospital where my life was supposed to end. Olivia was born there because God made it clear that that was his plan. And I am so grateful for that, because that hospital has been redeemed and restored from a place that held some of the worst memories in my life to a place that held the most beautiful memories of my life. And not long after Olivia was born at that very same hospital, the man that you saw on the screen came into my life. That's my grandfather, a biological father's father. Not long after Olivia was born at St. Luke's Hospital, my grandfather came into my life. And I know you can see that same beautiful look of joy on his face that I see. My grandfather was a part of my life until a little over a year ago. My grandfather lived to be 91 years of age. And my grandfather was devastated by that news that they found in the letter that was tucked in his top desk drawer at my birth father's office. They never knew why my birth parents' relationship suddenly ended years ago. They never knew about the abortion or the little girl who had lived. And I can tell you that it's changed my grandfather's life to know that he had a granddaughter and then have these great granddaughters enter into his life. My great aunt has also been a huge part of my life since that time. And I wish I could tell you all tonight that I was united with all of my birth father's family. We lived in the same community for many, many years. But my own grandmother passed away before she could ever bring herself to meet me. This is what abortion does to families. It impacts relationships. It changes people for generations unless that healing occurs. And as hard as it is sometimes to see my family still walk through that, I still have hope, because I know God's not done yet. He's not done working in their lives, and he's not done working in yours, and he's not done working in mine. And as I close my time with you tonight, I want to share with you just how God has continued to work in my life and my birth mother Ruth's life. Back in 2013, I was finally contacted by a member of Ruth's family after going many, many years from hearing from my maternal grandparents. My family and I had moved from Sioux City, Iowa to Kansas City, Missouri. And that is ultimately when her family reached out to me. That's how I learned that the abortion was forced upon her, that her mother was responsible for so many things. And that's how I learned the biggest secret about my survival that even my adoptive parents never knew. And that's that Ruth had spent over 30 years of her life believing that I had died that day at the hospital. She did not know that the abortion had failed. She was told it had been successful. She didn't know if it was a little boy or a little girl whose life had been ended in that abortion. All she knew was that she had lived with incredible regret after that day. That was the greatest secret that ever could unfold in our lives. And we set out on a path to being reconciled with one another. We had some really difficult emails initially, as you can imagine, because she questioned how I could ever love her. She questioned how I could ever forgive anyone in her family for those decisions that were made about my life. And so we spent about 3 years building those walls of trust and love with one another before we finally met face to face for the first time. And when I first published my book, You Carried Me, I shared the story about meeting Ruth face to face for the first time. What I didn't share was that there was a really particular reason why we met at the Kansas City Zoo. It's a safe place, as you can imagine, trying to establish some normalcy. It was also one of the most sacred moments you can ever imagine, coming face to face with a person whose life is so intertwined with yours. That day when I first met her, my half-sister Jennifer placed her hand in mine, and I knew that that was one of the most powerful moments in my life. Ruth and I embraced, and as she was crying, she said, "I never got to hold you." As if it wasn't beautiful enough that she finally got to hold me nearly 4 decades later. What's also incredibly beautiful is that there is one big detail about her life that none of us knew. The reason why we met at the Kansas City Zoo is because when I moved with my family to Kansas City, we never could have imagined that this is where she lived. I moved from the city where my birth father lived to now the city where my birth mother and one of my half sisters, Jennifer, lived. If you want to cue up that final photo for me. These are some really important women in my life. On the left, you will see my half sister, Sarah. She's a professor. In the red sweater is my birth mother, Ruth. I am standing there next to her. And then on the far right side is my half sister, Jennifer. I was just texting with both Ruth and Jennifer earlier tonight as they were checking in on Ava to see how she's doing with her broken arm. And I can tell you that it's an incredible joy for me to be united with Ruth, to be united with my half sisters. My children are raised alongside their cousins right here in the same community. My kids know that, yes, abortion is a part of our family story. But more importantly, they know that ours is a story about love and forgiveness and purpose. And I know that if Ruth was here tonight alongside me, she would thank Lifeline for the work that they do, because every woman deserves better than what Ruth experienced both in that abortion and for years after. And I know this is my calling. You know, I'm no longer ashamed or embarrassed to be who God created me to be. I am grateful for the purpose that He has given me in this world. And I know as we think about calling, we all can think that, yes, this is Melissa's calling. But I want to leave my time with you tonight for you to prayerfully reflect upon your calling. You know, I suspect you may have heard some things tonight, either through Robin or the client testimonies, or yes, maybe even my story that is hitting you. I believe the Holy Spirit is moving there tonight. And I want you to prayerfully consider how you are being called to give of your time, maybe as a volunteer there at Lifeline, how you are called to give of your talent. You know, there are so many ways that you can assist Lifeline in saving lives like mine, impacting generations to come, and saving and transforming the lives of the women and the men who come through the doors. So I want you to prayerfully consider how you can give of your time, your talents, and yes, also your financial treasure. There at your tables, you will have some pledge cards. Table host, if you can go ahead and pass those out there at your table. And I will proceed with talking to you a little bit about how you can answer God's calling there tonight and filling out these cards to share in your calling there with Lifeline. I'm going to speak with you a little bit as you pass those cards out because I know we're really great, hopefully, still in today's world with multitasking. And so here tonight, you have the great opportunity to answer God's calling. And I know we can't put a price tag on life. Every life is priceless. I look upon my daughter's lives every single day, and I can tell you, I would give anything to ensure that my children's life were spared from abortion. They are priceless. But we know that there is a price tag that Lifeline incurs every single day to offer those ultrasounds, to provide information, to provide resources and support to women and men and save the lives of children, to keep the lights on. That list could go on and on. So when we think about every life being priceless, we also need to think about the price tag that Lifeline incurs. So there are a couple of ways that you can give tonight. You can first of all, be sure to fill out your personal information if you haven't already. You can fill out your name and address, your phone number, your email, and also any church affiliation. You can also see right there on those cards that they have these great QR codes. We're seeing them everywhere these days, but you can scan your QR code to see more about how you can support Lifeline. And this is one of the ways that you can actually give of your financial treasure tonight that I'll talk about in just a second. But there are a couple of ways that you can give of your financial treasure to ensure that lives are saved and transformed. So you'll see on your pledge cards, you can give a one-time gift tonight, and you would fill out what amount you want to give for that one-time gift. And then you can check off if you're going to give a cash donation, if you're going to give a check, or also an online donation that you would give through those pledge cards or through that QR code. There are also credit card machines that are going around tonight. You'll see them starting to circulate. You can give your credit card gift there tonight, also right there in the room. So that is a one-time gift of an amount that you would set tonight. You can also give a monthly donation. And you can check off if you're going to give that monthly donation by check, or also if you're going to give online. So you would scan that handy little QR code, and it's going to lead you to how you can make that gift monthly right there online. So you would proceed with filling out what your monthly gift is going to be to support saving and transforming lives. But before you fill out your one-time gift or your monthly pledge, can I challenge you just a little bit? And you're thinking, yeah, Melissa, you're not in the room, so you can challenge us. I want to challenge you to consider whether you can give both a one-time gift and a monthly pledge. And I say that only because this is something that my husband and I chose to do many years ago. And I know many of you will recognize this quote. It is to live more simply so someone else can simply live. You've seen it in different contexts, but I can tell you my husband and I adopted this motto for our family. And what that means is that we choose to live simply in many ways so that we can give both one-time gifts and monthly pledges to organizations in our community and around the world that we support. And it looks different from family to family and person to person, but I can throw out some ideas for you. It looks like I don't get my nails done, ladies. I'm sorry. I could show you my nails right now. They're probably a mess. And it means that I have been known to cut my own hair, even before we were doing it in the pandemic. It means that my husband takes his
lunch to work more times than he would ever like to. It means that I don't stop by the local coffee place but there are you give both a one-time gift and so that you can live more simply, so that you can offer up both those one-time gifts and those monthly donations to Lifeline here tonight. So I would just prayerfully ask that you consider everything you've heard tonight, how you're feeling called to give, and proceed with then filling out both your one-time gift and hopefully your monthly donation so that Lifeline's incredible work can continue to happen right there in your community. After you fill out your pledge cards, Nancy will be coming up to give you some more information about how table hosts can collect those cards tonight, and then we'll proceed with a closing prayer. Thank you again for your flexibility. I know my Ava really appreciates having her mom here today and alongside her tonight as I help her get some rest. And I thank you even more so for your continued support of Lifeline. God bless you all.